Thank you. And I haven't even said anything. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our wonderful conference. I'm Katherine Tyler Scott, and I'm the chair of the ILA board. And it's a privilege and honor to be with you this morning. No matter where we are during an ILA conference, we will find opportunities for meaningful connection and substantive conversation, not only because of this great host city, chair, and committee, who have literally and figuratively set the table for us and for these things to happen, but because it is who we are. The exchange of ideas and the diversity of perspectives, sectors, and disciplines is a level of complexity we can embrace, and it enables us to endure turbulence because we share the mission of improving leadership for the common good, for the global good. The choice to be in Brussels reflects this. Place and space matter. The square in Brussels symbolizes community and the marketplace of information and practice that we all encounter. Even our efforts at finding our way in this building is a reminder of how disorienting change can be, yet how our ability to adapt and to be agile leads to mastery. The opening plenary was a perfect blend of sobering reality and inspiring hope, expressed in the lives and remarks of the awardees and the keynote speaker. Today, we will begin with the presentation of awards to Jim Meindl and Bob Lord, 2 more recipients whose lives and work highlight ILA's values and its central mission. Presenting them is Ron Reggio, chair of the ILA Legacy Committee. Please welcome Ron.
Well, good morning. On behalf of the Legacy Committee and the ILA Board, it's my great honor to induct 2 members of the ILA Legacy Award. The first is James Meindl. Jim Meindl was the Donald S. Carmichael Professor of Organization and Human Resources in the School of Management at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Meindl was a gifted social psychologist and leadership scholar who passed away at the age of 52 while at the height of his career. He's best known for his work on the romance of leadership, a social constructionist and follower-centric approach that suggests that people tend to over-attribute group outcomes to the leader and pay lesser attention to the role of context, followers, and group processes. His work, which includes more than 60 publications and a book series, had a huge effect on our understanding of leadership and organizations. His legacy lives on, however, in the many student scholars and colleagues that continue to conduct research on the social construction of leadership. Jim Meindl was active in his community. He served as an organizational consultant, and he was a recipient of numerous teaching awards. At 5 p.m. today, there will be a session where his former students and colleagues will host remembrances of Jim and talk about his work. So please join me in recognizing Dr. James Meindl's contributions to our understanding of leadership and his induction into ILA's Virtual Hall of Fame. Our next inductee is Bob Lord, Robert Lord. Bob, will you please join me here at the podium? Robert Lord is professor of leadership at Durham Business School and director of Durham's International Center for Leadership and Followership. Prior to this, Dr. Lord was a professor at the University of Akron for many years. Much of Dr. Lord's research takes place at the intersection of cognitive science, leadership, and most recently, neurocognitive science. He's perhaps best known for his work on implicit leadership theories, examining how we cognitively interpret and categorize leadership and leadership prototypes. Bob Lord is on the forefront of modern leadership research with his work on the role of emotions and embodied cognition in leadership perceptions, how leadership perceptions engage our information processing, affects our motivation, and his recent work that uses quantum physics to consider the ways that people perceive and travel through time, creating new realities and constructing new identities. He's the recipient of many awards for his contributions to leadership and organizational science, including the Distinguished Career Award from the Network of Leadership Scholars at the Academy of Management and SIOP's Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award, among others. Bob has worked with scholars across the globe and regularly convenes a network of scholars who study implicit leadership theories. Bob Lord is an outstanding teacher and mentor. The list of leadership scholars who have studied with Bob reads like a who's who of leadership researchers. So in so many ways, Bob Lord has had an enormous impact on the field of leadership. So please join me in recognizing Robert Lord. Oh, no, you're not. All right.
Okay, well, I was told I could say a few words and keep it to 3 minutes, which I'll do. There's two things I want to say. One is, how do you get to a position like this? And Ralph Stockdale got an award like this many years ago, and Ralph's comment was, well, if you live long enough. And that's certainly part of it. But the other thing is, you've got to pick something like leadership that you're interested in and can study for a lifetime. And you have to be lucky. And I was lucky in both going to the University of Michigan and going to Carnegie Mellon, where Herb Simon was there at the time, and I learned a lot about social cognitions. And then I went to the University of Akron and was lucky enough to have a number of really good graduate students to work with, and I'll name some of them. I started out with working with Mike Rush, Jim Phillips, Roseanne Foti, Bruce Avolio, then Dave Day, Paul Hanges, lucky enough to write a book with Karen Mayer, who's no longer with us. And then I had a bunch of Canadian students. My mom was Canadian, and those students were Doug Brown, Laura Naidu, Russ Johnson, Daisy Chang, who's not Canadian, and then Ernest Hoffman and Jessica Din and Sarah Chandrak. So you've got to be in the right place at the right time, and I think I get too much credit and they don't get enough credit. It's lucky to follow Mindel because I think I'm an example of what he talks about. And then I have had a number of great colleagues. At the University of Akron, and then I was lucky enough just by chance to end up at Durham University, and there I'm working with Olga Epitropaki and Birgit Schins and Tiffany Hansborough, who's not there but is there occasionally, and Suzanne Braun, and perhaps most important, my partner for 25 years and colleague, Rosalie Hall, is somebody who's helped me all the way along my career. So I'm appreciative to this award, and Ron, thank you, and the Legacy Committee. But more than that, I'm appreciative to have had all these colleagues to work with, and they're just not people you work with, they're friends that I've had for a lifetime. So thank you all.
I think you probably have noticed that all of our honorees have this incredible, formidable intellect and spirit of humility mixed together. So thank you so much, Bob. We appreciate it. Now that we've honored Jim and Bob, it's with the Lifetime Achievement Awards. Our next awards are for the Fred Jablin Doctoral Dissertation Award and the Kenneth Clark Student Research Award. please welcome presenters Jennifer Martineau and Donaldson Forsythe, who prefers to be called Don, to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm honored to present the Kenneth E. Clark Student Research Award on behalf of the Center for Creative Leadership and the International Leadership Association. After a 40-year career at top-tier universities in 3 branches of the U.S. military and serving in leadership roles at numerous professional organizations, Dr. Ken Clark was our president at CCL from 1981 to 1985. It flourished under his leadership. When he retired and became a Smith-Richardson Senior Scientist, which is a lifetime appointment, one of the retirement gifts from our staff, always funny people, included a 12-foot-long, 3-inch diameter wooden pole with the inscription, "For Kenneth Clark, a leader who routinely solves problems that other people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole." After his retirement, CCL created this award to recognize unpublished student papers on leadership or leadership development, and we began co-sponsoring the award with ILA in 2010. This year's award recipient is Dr. Aleka McClellan, now a consultant with Lee Hecht Harrison Knightbridge Talent and Leadership Development in Toronto, Ontario. She received her PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The award-winning research is titled "The Role of Leaders in Motivating Their Subordinates at Work." I encourage you to attend her session this afternoon from 2:45 to 3:45 in Studio 204. I promise you will be impressed by the work of this young scholar. Thank you. And Dr. Aleka McClellan, congratulations.
I wasn't told I had an opportunity to say anything, but I do want to thank you very much for this award. It's a huge honor.
Bonjour. It is my distinct honor to join you today to announce the recipient of the 2017 Frederick Jablin Award for the outstanding doctoral dissertation in the field of leadership studies. The International Leadership Association, in collaboration with the Jepson School of Leadership, makes this award each year in memory of the life's work of the great Dr. Frederick Jablin, friend, researcher, and educator. This year, I am pleased to announce the awarding of the Jablin to Dr. Uze Dural. Dr. Dural, would you join me on the stage? Dr. Dural received her undergraduate degree in psychology from Bugajji University and PhD in management from Sambhaji University. Her dissertation, titled "Exposure-Induced Malleability of Implicit Prejudice Towards Female Leadership, a Quasi-Experimental Experiment Following Municipality Elections," is a mouthful, but also a reminder for those of us who are old enough to remember Campbell and Stanley's wise recommendations about quasi-experimental designs. For Dr. Dural, using such design was able to identify the effects of exposure to women leaders. Mayors in Turkish municipalities where before all the leaders had been men. The downside, the election of women to these positions was not a game changer. People did not suddenly degender their implicit leadership theories and begin thinking women and leadership go together nicely. However, Dr. Dural did identify some positive consequences that resulted when leaders interacted closely with agentic and highly competent women leaders. Dr. Dural's work not only contributes substantially to our understanding of leadership, but also reminds us that the best and brightest researchers in the world today are studying leadership. Please join me in congratulating her for her great achievement.
All of you know that ILA bridges theory and practice, people and ideas, and provides the space for cross-disciplinary exchanges that bring a deeper understanding of leadership, so needed in turbulent times. This morning, we will experience a conversation between retired General David H. Petraeus and Robert Vanderroor that accomplishes all three of these. David Petraeus is widely recognized for his leadership in Iraq and Afghanistan, and remembered for his numerous service awards and expertise in global security and economic issues. He is a graduate of West Point and received his PhD from Princeton. Robert Vanderroor is an international communications expert, moderator, and commentator. He is a former television and news anchor, an award-winning journalist and author. Robert has conducted interviews with virtually every major leader in the world. The video we will now view was produced by him. After it is completed, David and Robert will come up and begin the keynote conversation. Thank you.
David Petraeus will retire from the Army that he loves to become the next CIA director.
Russia certainly is one of the threats, one of the challenges.
Thank you, Katherine, for this kind introduction. It's good to be with you all here on this early Saturday morning, and especially with you, General David Petraeus. He just arrived, had 4 hours of sleep. Are you in top shape? Okay.
Ready for a push-up contest?
Okay. My God, yeah, that's
anybody?
A 4-star general. Could you expect something else? Ladies and gentlemen, we have 45 minutes or an hour or so. So we have, this is a kind of speed dating. Let's kickstart. General, you prefer, so I will stick to general. Many people are worried about leadership in turbulent times. Terrorism, populism, autocratic leadership is on the rise in a polarized world. How worried are you?
There's a lot of reasons to be worried right now. The global situation, I think, right now is one that is the most complex array of threats that we have seen since the end of the Cold War. You have revisionist states, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even China to a degree, although China is also the U.S.'s largest trading partner. None of them is satisfied with the status quo. You have extremist groups, Al-Qaeda, Islamist extremist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so forth. There are growing cyber threats that are becoming ever more pernicious and more dangerous. There is domestic populism, as you noted, on the rise in some countries, but also not on the rise in some others. Look at France, look at the Netherlands.
But they're still there.
They're still there, but of course they didn't. Again,
yeah.
the Macron victory is a big deal. But certainly Brexit, the US election, even what we saw with the right-wing party in Germany all reflect a degree of domestic populism. So that is a concern. I think the biggest issue, interestingly, may be actually the strain and stress on the rules-based international order. This group of multilateral organizations, financial institutions, norms, and principles, all established in the wake of the worst 50-year period in the history of mankind, 2 world wars and a depression. And these have, for all of their shortcomings, these have done reasonably well over the decades since the end of World War II, and generally have guided the world through a lot of difficulty. And that is now under more strain than ever, I think, by, again, revisionist countries and others. And it comes at a time where there is a seeming ambivalence on some occasions by the United States to continue to lead the rules-based international order. I think that the U.S. should and needs to continue to do that, but we're still really coming to understand what is the American foreign policy in the Trump administration. It's obviously evolving as it goes along.
We'll get to that later, especially on foreign policy of the United States, but as a world leader. But what kind of leadership do we need in these turbulent times? We seem to live in an impatient world. People are impatient, leaders are impatient, using Twitter all the time. New politicians trying to exploit fear, while old traditional politicians try to work out rock-solid solutions for complex problems.
Sure. Well, there are 4 tasks of a strategic leader, and what we need is leaders who can perform these tasks. The first task is to get the big ideas right. That's the policy, it's the strategy. The surge in Iraq, for example, that mattered most was not the additional 25 or 30,000 forces. It was the surge of ideas, as we say. It was a complete overhaul of the strategy that we pursued. Instead of consolidating on big bases, you live with the people because that's the only way to secure them. Instead of tolerating reconciliation, you pursue it aggressively. Instead of handing off to the Iraqis, we take responsibility back up. 180-degree shift. So you got to get the big ideas right. By the way, this is true in the business world as well. And you need leaders who can do that, because at the end of the day, a strategic leader does have to make the decision about the policy. Those are the big ideas. Then second, you've got to communicate the big ideas throughout the breadth and depth of the organization that you're privileged to lead. Third, you have to oversee the implementation. This is how do you spend your own time, your own battle rhythm, what metrics do you focus on, what is the rigor of those, and so forth and so on. Then also the leadership tactics and techniques, you might say. And then there's a 4th step that is often overlooked, and this is you need a formal process to determine how the big ideas need to be revised or changed so that you can do it all again and again and again. We practiced this with enormous rigor when I was commanding the surge, also in commanding Afghanistan and some of the other positions that I was privileged to have. And the question is, can people get the big ideas right first and foremost? Can they get the policy decisions right? And there's certainly some debate about that.
So you have set some standards for a good leader. Have you seen those standards yet in Donald Trump?
Well, it's interesting because if I'll focus on foreign policy and the decision not to certify the Iran deal and not to confirm that it's in the interests of the United States.
News of yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
Despite that, I would contend that the emerging Trump foreign policy still represents more continuity than it does change. And I can tick down the various issues.
But that's on the policy side. But I mean, as a person, you said something about what a good leader needs to do. You said you need a process. Well, the process is, for Trump, seems to be Twitter and underbelly.
No, not at all.
No?
There's a process.
There is a process? Okay.
There may be some occasional lack of message discipline. That's a different issue.
Okay.
But there is a... work with me here. I know it's early in the morning. But no, there's a very good process. And the guy running it is H.R. McMaster, Lieutenant General, worked for me multiple times in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and at U.S. Central Command. His deputy also did. His deputy's a Rhodes Scholar, PhD from Columbia, successful businessman, 2-star officer in the reserves. General Mattis, my shipmate, great buddy. All the military senior leaders are all part of the surges in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, I'm very comfortable with these military leaders being in positions that normally are held by civilians, not always, because they know more than anybody in government today that every problem is not a nail and it can't be handled with a hammer. They know that every policy has to be comprehensive. There's no military solution to anything. Military is normally is necessary but not sufficient. So there is a policy process, and I walk you down the policies, and I'll show you why it is.
Okay, we'll do that.
Now, hang on a second, because I want to establish this too. Take China, most important relationship in the world. Trump was critical of China during the campaign, its trade practices, currency manipulation, helping North Korea, et cetera. Took a phone call from the Taiwan president. Ultimately, he called President Xi Jinping, embraced the one China policy, invited him to Mar-a-Lago, had the Mar-a-Lago summit, and is pursuing a, again, relatively traditional policy, albeit with more pressure because of North Korea, because this situation facing President Trump is different than that which has faced any of his predecessors.
Absolutely.
You know, Palestinian-Israel issue. Floundered around a little bit, said that with Netanyahu one time, he said, one state, two state, whatever they want. Ultimately, it's the two-state solution. He hesitated to invoke the Article 5 collective self-defense agreement at NATO. He ultimately did. He has embraced his other allies. Again, you can work your way down. Now, there are some differences, perhaps, when it comes to trade, climate, immigration, and the sort of propagation of American values. But
now it's my turn. You mentioned a list, and I fully agree. I fully agree. But I'll give you another list. TTP.
I said trade.
UNESCO.
Wait, what was the second one? What was the second?
Paris. UNESCO.
I said trade, climate, immigration, and propagation of values.
UNESCO.
Yeah.
Iran.
Is that a big deal?
No, and even... no, well, you answered the question. You don't think it's a big deal, Iran?
UNESCO?
Yeah.
They've had it coming for years. I mean, he's just manifesting the frustration that American leaders have felt all along. I'm not saying I would have done it.
Okay.
It's frankly, in the grand scheme of relationships and issues and foreign policy, you know, this would be a shoulder shrug.
Yeah.
TTP is not. TTP is serious, but we also need to see what happens with NAFTA, which is being negotiated. There's some tough negotiating going on, and we need to see what happens with the Korean-U.S. trade agreement as well.
And the NATO support also seems, well, according to experts, not only me,
he's embraced it, and not only that, he can take credit for European countries spending more. He beat them up, and they actually did. Now, I'd also say, obviously, the greatest gift that NATO's received in recent decades is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, your fellow countryman and colleague, patriot Nick Burns, who is an undersecretary at the State Department and now a teacher at Harvard, he tweeted, also civilized people tweet, he tweeted last night...
Not all civilized people.
No. And he tweeted, "We are getting isolated." And Nick is a real, well, I would say he's Republican, but he served Republican presidents. And he is a real patriot. And if somebody, an icon of diplomacy, says something like that, and there are more, Ivo Daalder, Stroop Talbot, Sandy Versbouw, they all are very worried about the style.
And I think there's something to that that's legitimate. And as I said, you missed it earlier, I said the seeming ambivalence on some days of the U.S. to continue to lead the rules-based international order. We still don't really know what America first means, frankly. You know, if it's just that you're looking to your own interests first, I mean, what a revelation. Most presidents don't flat out say it that way, but obviously the first question is always, what are the American interests in this particular policy?
Yep.
And just because you put your own country first, which one would expect to be the case anyway, although not necessarily so public, that doesn't mean that you put everybody else last.
No.
You can put yourself first by being part of a great alliance that amplifies the power of your particular country. So, but there's reason to be concerned. I got it.
Yeah. Okay. Note it down. You are an expert in leadership. Are there any political leaders you admire?
Sure. Yeah, plenty of
Who's your hero?
Well, I mean, Chancellor Merkel, I think, it deserves our admiration. Prime Minister Abe, Prime Minister Modi, President Xi deserves it. I think you may not agree with all of the some of the practices in China that are
autocratic leader
that are taking away some of the freedoms and making trade more difficult and boxing off certain elements of the society, but certainly I think deserves admiration for being an extraordinary leader. Sultan Qaboos of Oman, I mean, I used to call him the Lee Kuan Yew of the Middle East. There's a number of great leaders out there, and they come and go, and so it's not as if there's just a sheer dearth of leadership around the world. It is true that there's a degree of partisanship in Washington that is quite substantial. There's a degree of gridlock there. But let's remember, the U.S. has been through some pretty tough times before. People sometimes forget that among the founding fathers, the sitting Vice President of the United States shot and killed the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
That's partisanship.
Yeah.
We had a bloody 4-year civil war. That's serious partisanship. We've had lots of this. And there's a new documentary that's been being watched in the United States on the Vietnam era and reminded people how grim the situation was in the United States in the late 1960s and early 1970s, where you not only had a very, very substantial anti-war movement in which people were killed during some demonstrations, but you also had terrible race riots. Many of the inner cities of the United States were in flames. So we've been through tough times before, and Warren Buffett is always fond of saying, never bet against America, and I would advise that to everybody as well. That doesn't mean that we don't need some progress in Washington. I used to teach a course, in fact. I taught for 3.5 years at the Honors College of the City University of New York, while also doing as a partner at KKR. This is 1 day a week. And the course was titled The North American Decades, which is what I contend is the accurate description of where we are right now. We're no longer in the American century, but we're not yet in the Asian century or the Chinese century. We're in the North American decades. And the number of decades of this will depend on how well Washington does turning policy and legislative headwinds, in other words, issues that are holding the United States back and turning them into tailwinds to propel us forward. Because the United States is on the threshold of 4 extraordinary revolutions: the IT revolution, the energy revolution, the manufacturing revolution, and the life sciences revolution. And if we can deal with issues such as education of the workforce for the 21st century, comprehensive immigration reform, tax reform, infrastructure investment, all these different issues that need to be resolved in Washington, not all locally. If we can do that, then the United States is going to be in terrific condition. But it's not clear right now that we are going to be able to do that.
Let's have a look at your own leadership in turbulent times, when you led the coalitions, the international coalitions in Iraq and Afghanistan. What are your personal lessons from 16 years of warfare after 9/11?
Well, there are strategic lessons that I think I'd want to lay out first. The first is that ungoverned spaces in North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia will be exploited by Islamist extremists. It's not if, it's just when, and how bad will it be. Second, you have to do something. You cannot admire this problem until it goes away, because it's not going away. And also because Las Vegas rules do not apply in these places. In other words, what happens there does not stay there. It tends to spew violence, instability, extremism, and a tsunami of refugees, not just into neighboring countries, but all the way into, of course, Western Europe. And of course, it's that tsunami of refugees that caused such a degree of populism to emerge in some of the countries of Western Europe. The third is that in doing something, the U.S. has to lead. And the reason is quite simple. The U.S. has more of the assets that really are helping us to enable other forces on the ground. So this is the unmanned aerial vehicles, particularly Predators and Reapers. They're the most effective, they're the highest flying, best resolution and everything. And they have 150 people keeping each one of those in the sky 24 hours a day. It's obviously multiple platforms, multiple crews, multiple payload operators, and all the rest of this. And then the intelligence analysts and everything else. And we have by the way, we have more of those than all the rest of the world put together times 6. All the rest of our coalition world put together times 6. And then we have the precision strike and the industrial strength ability to fuse intelligence, which is hugely important. We do want coalition partners, and we do want Muslim partners. If you really think about this, this is more of a clash within a civilization. It's a fight for the Islamic world than it is a fight.
This particular point became your trademark.
It's one of the trademarks. Yeah,
in Iraq. Well, you became famous of that approach.
A few trademarks out there. The fourth idea is...
Share them with us, General.
I am right now, if you'll let me. The fourth big lesson is that we have to have a comprehensive approach. Again, military action is necessary but not sufficient. It takes all the other elements. This is what we were famous for, the comprehensive civil military campaign that we had in Iraq. The interesting element here is that we are not doing all of these different elements. The host nation now increasingly is the one fighting and dying on the front lines, as we are enabling them with these platforms, with precision strike, with advice, with assistance, training, equipping, and all the rest of that. So that's hugely important, but you have to have a comprehensive approach, because the paradox here is that you cannot counter terrorists like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda with just counter-terrorist force operations. That's not enough. It takes reconciliation, politics, restoration of basic services, reconstruction, rule of law, all of this in addition to military clear, hold, and build and counterterrorism operations, which are needed, but again, not necessary, or not sufficient. And then the fifth one is, and this is hugely important, this is a generational struggle. Make no mistake about it. This is not the fight of a decade, much less a few years. And if you acknowledge that it's a generational struggle, then you realize that you're going to have a sustained commitment. And to enable a commitment to be sustained, it has to be sustainable in terms of blood and treasure. So you've got to keep your casualties down and you got to keep the cost down. So what you're doing is you are enabling, advising, and assisting others who are doing the bulk of the fighting and the bulk of the other activities so that we can, again, have a sustainable approach. And that is actually working. It's working in Iraq.
Is that so?
It's, well, absolutely, sure. We're about to take the rest of the ground caliphate away from Islamic State in Iraq, just about doing it in Syria, the Islamic State. There's another Al-Qaeda affiliated group over in Idlib province that'll have to be dealt with next, but that'll be dealt with.
But the countries themselves are quite unstable.
Yeah, no question. And as I have often noted, the battle after the battle is actually more important. So once you've defeated the Islamic State, that's when the political battle, the battle for power and resources begins. And that's going to be very, very difficult.
Okay, but I don't want to praise you too much, but you managed an improvement on the ground, on the field, in the field.
85% reduction of violence is a pretty substantial improvement.
In your period?
Yes.
But now...
And it was sustained for 3.5 years after that until, tragically, Prime Minister Maliki, my partner during the surge, not always, sometimes a reluctant partner, but he undid what we did. He alienated, once again, the Sunni Arab population of Iraq and recreated fertile fields for the planting of the seeds of extremism and let Al-Qaeda in Iraq get back up, reconstitute, become the Islamic State, go into Syria, gain all kinds of power and capabilities.
One short question on this generational conflict. You say it will take a generation. Well, what do you think about the international approach? Countries like the Netherlands, like many other countries, going in for 3 or 2 years and then going out. So you have not a real long-term commitment. You were there, you had success, then you moved on to a new job. So what is the long-term effect of the whole operation?
On whom?
On the people who are living in such a country.
Obviously, it is harmful if there is active fighting going on, which is why obviously you've got to. I mean, obviously it's harmful. I mean, half the population of Syria is displaced.
They're in Europe.
500,000 people are killed.
Yeah.
Half is displaced outside the country. So obviously it's very harmful. But I mean, you can't. We didn't start the Syrian civil war.
No.
That started.
Absolutely.
That was, and so what we're trying to do is get it. Frankly, what we need to do in Syria, and I've argued for this for 2 years, is to take steps to stop the bloodshed. And that means that we have to guarantee certain areas. There are ceasefire lines that are being established, but in our negotiations with the Russians, they ensure that the Syrians observe those, and that will allow refugees to go back to some of the areas at the least. It allows reconstruction, humanitarian assistance, and so on. And there's a concerted effort to do just that, finally. We should have done this years ago.
Yeah. Where are we on a broader scale in the global war on terror? With Al-Qaeda still being out there, with ISIS still being out there, attacking our cities, London, Paris, Berlin, Nice, Barcelona. They're coming to the West to attack us. How do you look at that?
Well, again, you have to have a picture that encompasses all areas. There's obviously substantial progress in Iraq, where, again, the last element under control of the Islamic State is out in the western part of Anbar province, Al-Qaim. That'll be taken away. In Syria, one of the last big cities we've almost got all of Raqqa. That'll fall within another week or so. There's a city called Deir ez-Zor that's being fought. They're now starting to realize that they're going to die, and they're actually finally starting to surrender. Hundreds of Islamic State fighters surrendered in Hawija, which is a city up in northeastern Iraq. So that is going well. Libya, been mixed progress against the ISIS or Al-Qaeda affiliate there. Somalia, same thing. It's an ebb and flow. Al-Qaeda senior leadership obviously has had some pretty devastating blows. The loss of Osama bin Laden. During the time that I was the CIA director, I'm sure it was purely coincidental, but it is a fact that during that time there were 3 successive deputy heads of Al-Qaeda who were killed. Anwar al-Awlaki was killed. Yemen remains a real problem. So again, it's a mix, and you have to walk your way around. And this is why, though, you have to stay after this, because if you let up, they will come back to life. And that was the tragedy in Iraq. We destroyed, not just defeated, destroyed. There's a military definition for that render an enemy incapable of accomplishing its mission without reconstitution. We destroyed Al-Qaeda in Iraq during the surge and kept it destroyed for the subsequent 3 years. And tragically, it was allowed to get back up off its face and cause the problems that it has.
Yeah. General, after your military career, you became CIA director. You stepped down earlier than planned. That obviously was a setback for you personally. We have leaders here in the hall. Do you have an advice for the leaders here how to deal with a personal setback?
Sure. First of all, minimize the chances of but no, look, the bottom line, look, any leader knows life is not full of what we say in the United States. It's not full of high five moments. There were plenty of setbacks in Iraq daily. Iraq was an absolutely grinding experience, the 19 and a half months that I commanded the surge. So were the earlier 2.5 years or so. There was never anything easy about it. We used to say it's all hard all the time, but hard is not hopeless. Afghanistan was a grinding experience. And on days that you take tough casualties or have serious reverses on the battlefield or in the political field in a place like Iraq, and there are mistakes that the unit makes, there's mistakes that you make, and in any of those cases, what you have to do is sit down take ownership, acknowledge, figure out what happened, acknowledge it, learn from it, and then take actions to mitigate the risks of something like that happening again, and then drive on. Get to pick up the rucksack, because life goes on.
Yeah.
And you've got to realize that, in fact, as well. That, I mean, unless it doesn't, which is not a good thought to have.
Yeah. You have been a product from an era of coalition building. And even when you became famous as a military leader under the neocons, there was diplomacy, there was coalition building. I can't see it right now. Where is US old school diplomacy? Building bridges, making friends and allies throughout the world. Coming back to Nick Burns' point and my point, isn't it a problem that the United States under this leadership is getting isolated? The leader of the Free West is getting isolated.
Well, I'd have a little bit more nuanced picture than that, candidly.
Hopefully.
The relationship between the President and Prime Minister Abe is terrific. I was in Japan twice last month alone. I do a tremendous amount of traveling all over the world. This is my...
Okay, but not with Angela Merkel.
Let me finish my answer here. 22 countries this year so far, many of them multiple times. And again, the partnership with Abe has never been better. Good relationship with the Koreans, terrific relationship with the Gulf states. They're very happy with what's going on. Some European leaders certainly feel as if there's been a brusqueness here that, and hanging up on the Prime Minister of Australia was probably not one of the techniques that I would have advised using. But this is a different style, and people just have to understand that. This is a guy who wrote in his book that before you negotiate with somebody, you punch them in the nose. And
that's not the way you worked in Iraq.
Of course it's not, and I wouldn't advise it, but you can argue that you can achieve results that way. And it may well be that all of this saber rattling and the overheated rhetoric with respect to North Korea's program really will get China's attention for the first time.
Yeah.
Because we've never succeeded in that before.
Yeah. Your point is there's more continuity than change.
Well, the point is, yes, you have to read the tweets. They do matter. Some of them have policy implications. But it's far better to look at follow the troops, follow the money, and follow the substance. And the troops, for example, have gone into the Baltic states, as was planned. There's further augmentation of the defenses in Europe by this administration. There's more money in the defense budget for that. There's more money for a variety of other initiatives. So again, keep that in mind. Don't get completely seized with tweets and that day's dramatic event. There are people who have said that this is a little bit like, you all know what Game of Thrones is? Okay. Well, I didn't. I've never watched it, but I understand. I have some sense of what it is. But the situation right now is in the White House is like Game of Thrones without dragons and women.
Yeah. Okay.
But okay, got it. Get over it. Again, follow the troops, follow the money.
Generals do have humor. You can see it here.
Even after just getting off a plane.
Yeah. After 4 hours of sleep. Let me provoke you a bit. You were asked in July whether Donald Trump is fit to serve. And then you avoided a clear answer. We are now dozens of tweets on North Korea and speeches further down the road. What is your answer now?
Yeah, I just don't. I'm a retired military guy. I am truly nonpartisan. I don't vote. I don't register with a party. I don't support candidates. I did write a letter about John McCain that just happened to appear 2 weeks before his election, but that's a special case.
And you're now too modest, because, sorry to interrupt, but you are now too modest. You were mentioned for 4 posts
but that's,
in the Trump administration.
That's appointed position, not a political position.
Okay.
And Democrats might have hired me too.
Okay.
And look, what I said that day, this is in Aspen where some guy sprung this question on us. I said, it is immaterial. He is the president. I'm not going to render an opinion on the president of the United States, this superficial issue of is he fit. I'll leave that to the talking heads on MSNBC and Fox.
And including the quote, the famous quote of Rex Tillerson, that he, well reported, well resourced, said Donald Trump is a moron.
I think there was another word in there as well.
Oh, can it be worse?
Remember when Vice President Biden said this is a big, blinking deal?
Yeah. No, but you may applaud. Yeah. Okay. No, but you touched upon a point which I like very much. When he was entering office, I was asked on television several times, "What do you think about Donald Trump?" And I said, "Well, let's wait when the real cabinet is there, and in the security corner there are your former colleagues." That looks.
This is the best national security team in recent memory.
Yeah.
A very, very good team. It's certainly the equal of any of the best in.
Could have been under Republican president there as well.
These all could have been.
Yeah. But
you might have had some others. I mean, there is a fact that many of the likely candidates for high-level positions in a Republican government were not eligible because they all signed letters saying that Donald Trump was unfit for the president. But the fact is, he's the president. So let's just analyze again. Follow the troops, follow the money, follow the substance. Listen to the tweets, but just don't get mesmerized by those. Look at what's really going on the ground. Let me give you another example. You remember the red line issue in Syria.
Absolutely.
I thought a huge blow to American credibility. I mean, if the President of the United States has repeatedly said this is a red line and another country crosses it and you then don't take action, in fact, it was even worse. He then threw it to Congress and they hadn't done a vote count and all of a sudden they realized they weren't going to get the votes needed. That was very nearly a disaster. And of course, Russia was delighted to save us in that case. Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his people again with this administration, and in less than 36 hours, 50 some odd cruise missiles hit the air base from which the planes that did that strike were launched. That's a heck of a lot better outcome, I think, this time. He's devolved authority down to commanders at appropriate levels, which I think is very significant. The policy on Afghanistan, it's well known that the drawdown in Afghanistan was faster than I recommended to the president. It's well known that the Iraq drawdown was not something that I recommended. And obviously there were issues with Syria that have also been reported. In Afghanistan, the president announced that he actually debated with himself on this. He really didn't want to do what he decided to do. And what he did decide to do, I think, is exactly the right approach. But it's not just 3,800 extra troops. It's also removing the restrictions on air power that were very lawyerly, not to allow civilians to be killed still, but again, to use them to help our Afghan partners when they're fighting the Taliban and not just the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, which was the previous case. Allowing advisors to go further down, closer to the battlefield. And perhaps most important of all, stating that there's no time limit. Remember when we had the surge in Afghanistan, we announced a buildup of 40,000 additional U.S. troops and some 10,000 coalition. And lo and behold, in the same speech, we announced that we're going to start a drawdown on a particular date as well. Well, I mean, if you want the enemy to think you have the will to outlast him, that's a pretty good way to reassure him. And there will not be time-based drawdowns under this president. That's a good policy in my view.
Yeah. Do you agree with Senator Corker, who said the three guys you worked with and you know well are separating this country from chaos?
Well, again, the McMaster, Mattis, Tillerson, and
Kelly.
General Kelly, the chief of staff, obviously all of them. Kelly was a two-star under me in Iraq during the surge. McMaster was a colonel, then a brigadier general. And then Mattis was providing the forces. We did lots of operations together. We were division commanders in the fight to Baghdad, et cetera. Look, I think they're serving the country very, very well. I don't, some of this is a little bit overhyped, I think, about they're the only thing standing between us and oblivion.
Yeah. Are they going to prevent a nuclear confrontation with North Korea?
Well,
controlling not only the tweet button, but also the nuclear button?
There's an implication that there's going to be that. These are just hypothetical questions.
What is your analysis? How do you look at it?
Well, what we're trying to do, obviously, is to get China's attention. This is not about North Korea. We're communicating to get China. China controls 90% of the trade that goes in and out of North Korea. They have the ability to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses, not to his knees, because they don't want to see a collapse of the regime. They don't want to see a reunification of the Korean Peninsula. That's a red line for them. But they could bring him to a point where he decides that, yep, I need to, and they did, that was done before, 15 some odd years ago when China got really serious. This is an umbilical cord that keeps North Korea off of life support. And they could do that. And that's what we want to see them do. They are starting to get much more serious about it. The UN Security Council resolutions that they passed, along with the other Security Council members, will greatly restrict North Korea. Countries around the world, this is again a comprehensive approach, countries around the world, one after another, are throwing out the North Korean diplomats. When they lose an embassy in a country like the United Arab Emirates, let's say, that makes it much more difficult for them to have cover for the front companies that they have operating all around the world, buying luxury goods for the elite in North Korea, buying banned materials for their missile, nuclear, and military programs. What happens down the road? Well, either in the short term, North Korea finally decides they ought to stop the missile testing and the nuclear testing, or they continue, and at some point there will be that most difficult of decisions for a president of the United States as to whether he has to use military force or not. And there's no way that one can.
That would be devastating, possibly.
There are no options for Korea that are other than ugly. They are all very, very ugly because at the end of the day, Seoul is a megalopolis of some 25 million people. It's enormous, and it's crept up toward the demilitarized zone because that's the only place there was additional land. I've watched this over the course of my military career. There are thousands of artillery pieces, rockets, missiles, and aircraft and so forth that could strike that area. We're not going to knock all that stuff down by any means. And we should never forget they also have not just nuclear weapons, but chemical and biological weapons. So any exchange of force could potentially be horrific, could be devastating. And at some point, again, North Korea is going to have to come to grips with that. And a U.S. president's going to have to make some very, very tough analysis and decisions.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at a moment that I'm opening up the debate. The General is prepared to take your questions. We have some mics around. Who would like to ask a question to General Petraeus? Yes, and could you please mention your name or your affiliation, and please, due to the time restrictions, keep it short, please.
Hi, my name is Margot Pensaval. I'm from the University of Southern California.
Fight on.
Fight on.
I have a chair at the University of Southern California,
I know.
so it's great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words and your thoughts. I would just like to hear your thoughts and ideas on the relative lack of women in leadership positions in the current administration in Washington.
I'm not sure what to say about it other than to confirm, obviously, that there are fewer women in this administration than there were certainly in the previous administration and probably the previous administrations. There are some high-level women, obviously, Senator McConnell's wife is one of them. The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, former governor, very impressive woman, part of the national security team. But yeah, no, I just think it's an accurate observation, and I'm not sure why it is, candidly. I don't know why there weren't more of them in the book. I don't know that there were more women signed letters that he's not fit or something like that. I can tell you that there obviously has been a substantial increase of women in leadership positions in the U.S. military. The CIA we were 45% women, I think, at least. And we had a very flexible human resources policy where even women who were in their childbearing years and had very small kids, believe it or not, CIA has its own daycare center. It's a terrific one. And we now have actually CIA officers who are sons or daughters of previous officers and actually sort of graduates of the daycare center as well. So and we would allow women to go on part-time work so they could keep their clearances, raise their kids, so they'd do 10 to 20 hours a week, just again to keep up. And then once the kids were at a point where they didn't need as much parental supervision, then they could come back full-time. Not every agency or department has that luxury, but there's been a huge effort, I think. There are always now 4-star generals who are women. The very first was just, gosh, less than a decade ago. Ann Dunwoody, a good friend of mine, great paratrooper. So there's certainly been lots of progress in that regard. But, you know, this is tough. In the financial firm, I'm a partner in a firm called KKR. It's one of the biggest private equity and overall investment firms in the world, 150 billion or so under management. It's a challenge there, and some of it's just the sheer amount of travel, I think. We actually have a policy there, believe it or not, where not only will we pay to bring the child with the mother, but a nanny with the mother as well. So we're very enlightened in that regard, but we're just trying to keep women because we are very committed to diversity. And I was hugely committed to that when I was in the military and also at the CIA. Your military should reflect your population. Your intelligence community should also reflect your population. Next question.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're on the second row.
And then stay down there if you would. There's one right behind you.
Hi, my name is Linda Pallone. I lived in Afghanistan for 2.5 years and really appreciate the opportunities to work with military there. You made the statement today that there's no military solution, and I was wondering what you'd speak about the military as a nation-building entity and the idea of what's needed to really develop leaders in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and how does the military address that?
Thank you.
That's a big question. And let me just be clear, there is no military solution that solves everything, but military action is absolutely necessary. I mean, you have to have a security foundation, or everything you try to build on it is building on a shaky foundation. We had times, in fact, where when I was commanding the surge in Afghanistan, I remember going to a particular division. I said, stop telling me about all the other stuff you're going to do. They had these wonderful plans for reconstruction and basic service restoration and getting markets going and all of this. I said, let's stop. I want to sit just with you, none of your staff officers, in front of a topographic map of your area. And I want you to tell me what the enemy is doing to you and what you are going to do to the enemy. That is pretty essential. When you do have security, obviously you can then build on it. And in a country like Afghanistan, the challenges, as you well know from having been there for 2.5 years, are so substantial that sometimes you almost don't know where to begin. To give you an example, we were training soldiers and police. We realized we actually couldn't train them until we taught them how to read and write, at least at an elementary school level. The illiteracy was some 70 or 80% of the recruits that we were getting. So we did basic skills education. I mean, if you can't read a license plate number You obviously can't give them the BOLO, which is be on the lookout list, because again, they're not going to be able to recognize it. So you have to go through that kind of process. Keep in mind, of course, that our goal in Afghanistan, as noble as it might have been to turn Afghanistan into Switzerland in 10 years or less, or 20 years, or even 30 years, that was not really our goal. Our goal was very straightforward, to eliminate the sanctuary that al-Qaeda had in eastern Afghanistan when the Taliban ruled the country, where the 9/11 attacks were planned and where the initial training of the attackers was conducted. And we did do that. And then the subsequent mission has been to ensure that they are not able to reestablish a sanctuary like that, or that the Islamic State could do that. There's something about eastern Afghanistan that really appeals to them, and I'm not sure if it's the culture, the people, what it is, but it's very, very, very desirable, and that's what we're trying to prevent. Now, over time, obviously, what you've got to do is help the Afghan security forces get to the point where they can secure the country much more themselves than having to rely on us. And you also have to help them develop sufficient ability to govern themselves to an Afghan good enough level. Again, we weren't trying to recreate the US democratic system over there. We were trying to create an Afghan good enough system that tied into, at the district level and below, traditional practices. In the legal world, for example, they had the hook, I don't know if you got into that, but we're just trying to recreate that, not trying to create the district attorney of New York office or something along those lines. Clearly, again, you do need to do a certain amount of nation building, because that's what solidifies the foundation of security. And you want to convince the people that they will have a better life under the new Afghanistan government than they would under the Taliban or some other extremist or ultra-fundamentalist group. We did a lot of work to train leaders. We built basically a version of the US Military Academy in Afghanistan, a 4-year college/military academy. There was a several-year police academy. There is the advise and assist effort, which is essentially mentoring their leaders. We had advisors in each of the ministries, from the State Department and the Agency for International Development. I mean, this is a very comprehensive program, but endless challenges. To give you the idea of what some of those challenges were, we were running the air traffic control for Afghanistan for over a decade, and I kept asking, why can't we just train some Afghans in air traffic control? What's so hard? I mean, they do have a university. We built universities for them too. And there's even the American University of Afghanistan, which I'm very proud of, and got some award from them this year. And so we trained some air traffic controllers. And the next thing you know, hey, there's one of the guys that we trained as an air traffic controller, but he's an interpreter for the United Nations Special Representative. What's this all about? Well, obviously they can make more money. We had to teach them English to be an air traffic controller. That's the language of air traffic control. Once they learn English, they can get a job as a translator, and that actually pays better than this very serious position for which they were trained. So you have endless challenges like that. It is akin to beating your head against the wall, but there's progress as well.
Okay, the next question there, the lady on the third row.
Hi, stand up. Hi, Deirdre Heenan, Ulster University. Ireland has had a long special relationship with America, and I wonder, would you comment on the issue of authentic leadership, which is a trend within leadership? To what extent do you think Donald Trump represents an authentic leader, or is he just a feather for every wind?
First of all, I'm not exactly sure I know precisely what an authentic leader is.
You were yourself.
I guess. You know, if an authentic leader has views and core values and this and that, I guess. Certainly, again, some of the communications by the president have certainly used rhetoric that I would not have used. They have, at times, inflamed different groups. There's a desire sometimes to mix things up. I think he enjoys controversy. I think he'd bring it on. This is a guy who does, as I mentioned earlier, really believe that you always want to keep the other side off balance. That you, again, punch the other guy in the nose before you sit down and negotiate. And that is a technique. I wouldn't necessarily embrace that in all cases. I will say, though, that there were times when I had meetings with very senior leaders of foreign countries, including presidents and prime ministers, when I was the battlefield commander, and I told my translator as we're going into the meeting, this is going to be a full range of emotions meeting. And that meant I'm going to seem to lose it because this is a really serious moment. And they're always shouting at me, and this time I'm going to do some shouting at them. And I told them the key is, if you ever think I'm truly losing it and I'm no longer acting, pluck my sleeve, because that's when you do something that may end up, as they say, being non-biodegradable. You say something that never goes away, or you do something that never goes away. So again, you know, the message discipline issue is not a trivial one, but what I just keep trying to do, if you will, is I chair the KKR Global Institute, which does the geopolitical risk, macroeconomic analysis, and environmental social governance issues analysis for any of the deals that we do. And we own, I don't know, 120, 130 companies that employ 1 million people around the world, so it's a pretty big deal. And I really try to focus on the substance more than on the style. There is a lot you can say about his style, and a lot has been said about it. What I keep trying to do is figure out, okay, what is the substance here? And on the Iran nuclear deal, we will have to see what the impact of that is, frankly. I was one who did not support nor oppose it in the end. I actually kept Ambassador Dennis Ross and I are two of the guys that got lobbied very hard by different sides, and we held our approval until the very end. But the deal has some very positive elements. You know, it gets rid of all the medium enriched uranium, and it got rid of 99% of the low enriched uranium. The plutonium path to a bomb is ended with cement poured into the reactor core. There's very intrusive inspections. The Israeli chief of defense staff said that Israel is safer for the next 10 years because of that deal. Now, having said that, there's also some significant shortcomings. It certainly got Iran $50 billion unfrozen around the world. They're back into the global economy. Some of that money goes to the Revolutionary Guards Corps and their Quds Force and their Shia militias and all the mischief that they're pursuing in Iraq and Syria, which they're trying to Lebanonize in the same way that they used Hezbollah to Lebanonize Lebanon. And the big problem is, of course, it all ends starting at 10 years and then some that continues to 15 years. So that's really what we should be focusing on. My hope is that Congress, which now has to determine what to do, will actually have a pragmatic approach, which would focus on, let's negotiate what comes after this deal, how could we extend it, and then obviously recognize that the deal does not include the missile program and the malign activity in countries in the region, and go after that separately. Because I'm afraid if we truly stepped out of the deal, that we would be more likely to isolate ourselves than we would isolate Iran.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this session unfortunately has come to an end. I think we could have continued for another 2 hours. General Petraeus, is there a chance, one last question, very short answer, is there a small chance that we could see you back in the Trump administration if Tillerson resigns or whatsoever? Are you available, Secretary of State, for your country, which you love so much?
Never say,
they need you.
Never say never, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you all very much.
Please join me, General Petraeus and Robert, please join me at the podium. Thank you. Thank you. Robert and General Petraeus. You've already gotten your standing ovation. I have to say, this has been one of the most compelling, intense, incisive, and sometimes perturbing, but certainly insightful, thoughtful conversations I've witnessed at ILA. And on behalf of the ILA board, I want to thank both of you for your leadership globally and for your commitment to the common good around the world. Thank you very much.
Is this?
I'm looking to see if it's Belgian chocolate or not.
It's not edible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. I am absolutely positive that you're going to be talking about this conversation for a little while longer, and may you have a wonderful day of conversations and connections. And we will see you this evening at the wonderful celebration and reception. Thank you all. Have a great day.